Hi there, fellow hikers. Welcome to a review of my summer 2025 hike through Pearl River Primary Forest, or in Swedish, Pärlälvens Fjällurskog. So, to start with, why did I do this hike? Well, the first reason is that untouched old forests have always fascinated me since I was young. And even though as much as 68% of the land mass in Sweden is covered by forests, it's only a tiny 0.5% that is such untouched primary forest. So it's quite unique and quite rare. Then there are also forests that, as one could say, are in between untouched and repeatedly logged. And those forests that have not been logged for 120 years or more are sometimes referred to as old growth forests, or in Swedish, Naturskog. And these are, of course, nice to visit and hike through as well, but they're not as nice and unique as the untouched primary forests. Another reason for why I did this hike at this time is that I recently watched Peter Persson's great videos of primary forests in Sweden, found in his YouTube channel In i Vildmarken. And that inspired me to plan and execute this hike through Pärlälvens Fjällurskog. Okay, so maybe enough as intro. Let's get through the planning and execution of my hike. So, where is Pärlälvens Fjällurskog? Well, let's look at the map. So here we see, first of all, where we are in the world. We're in the northern part of Sweden here, right? Then you see Pärlälvens Fjällurskog Nature Reserve is here. There is a river that was originally called Karats River that goes through part of the nature reserve here. Back in those days, they were fishing freshwater pearl mussels in this river, particularly I think in this area here. So this nature reserve got the name from the nickname of this river, Pearl River, right? Today it's not allowed to fish those mussels. I think they are protected and quite rare. So. Okay, so when I plan a hike, generally I choose a base camp, right, where I stay one night before and one night after. And if I have luggage, a duffel bag or something with some extra stuff, then that's where I store my luggage. So in this case, I chose Jokkmokk here, a small town, as my base camp. There are basically two main ways, I would say, to get to Jokkmokk. Let's assume you start in Stockholm in southern part of Sweden or central part of Sweden. Then you can take the train. It's a 13-hour train, so it's quite long, but it's, I would say, quite nice train journey through Sweden. And then you can get off here at this station here, Murjek, and catch a bus to Jokkmokk here. What I ended up doing this time, however, is fly to Luleå. That's the nearest sort of main airport in this region. So I flew to Luleå here and I caught a bus here a few hours to get to Jokkmokk. So then I'm at my base camp. And then looking at the actual hike, let's switch map here to this map. This is my whole hike. It ended up being 5 days. A loop here through the nature reserve and then ending up in Kvikkjokk mountain station. What I did was I caught a bus from Jokkmokk, destination Kvikkjokk up here. But I got off in this small village here, Njave, and started my hike here. And the hike starts by crossing a river here on a big concrete bridge. It's a very forceful river. But you start here on a dirt road, so this is like the approach into the nature reserve. And then after almost 5 kilometers, you reach the sort of border here of the nature reserve. And if we look at the profile here of the hike, I started at about just 300 meter here altitude when I got off the bus, crossed the river, and then gradually make my way into the border of the nature reserve here at about 400 meter altitude. Quite easy. And then the rest of the hike goes through the nature reserve, more forested area, but only reaching up to near 500 meter altitude here, and then finally to the camp for day one near to a lake here, which I will come back to shortly. So in terms of altitude, definitely no hardship here. And in terms of terrain, this day one here, gravel road, of course, very easy. This forest area here actually is relatively easy too. Mainly this was not so dense pine forest. Not a lot of willow bushes or small birch trees or not dense undergrowth. So it's fairly easy to do this walk here on day one to this lakeshore here. And not only that, I discovered here as I entered the nature reserve that there is a fairly visible beaten path through the forest here. And on top of that, someone has actually marked this beaten path with blue plastic ribbons. So I would say this day one hike here through here, both in terms of terrain, not really dense forest, and in terms of altitude is quite easy hike. And you start to get the vibe and the feeling of a primary forest, an untouched forest with a lot of dead trees and this hanging lichen hanging from tree branches, like the black lichen. It looks like the fur of bear that has been torn out, but it's not. It's a nickname, as you see in the video, is that the bear hair lichen. So you get the feeling already here in day one, basically as if you really are in a primary forest. So it's quite nice. And I would say, at least theoretically, if you didn't want to do a 5-day hike like I did here, you could actually just do one hike here overnight, lakeside here, which is quite beautiful, nice view, a breeze from the lake, etc. And then next day return back here. That would be a quick intro to just have a glimpse of a primary forest and not suffer too much in terms of difficulties. The only sort of hardship I would mention here already on day one is actually the amount of mosquitoes. I noticed already as I was going through the dirt road here, approaching the nature reserve, that the number of horseflies were a bit more than I expected. Quite persistent, following me a long distance here, and they never give up, right? So that was sort of a warning, perhaps, of what was to come. So as I got deeper and deeper into the forest here, the amount of mosquitoes, especially around wetland areas, was really massive. And as you can probably see in my video, I needed full protection with the mosquito net over my head and gloves and spraying my clothes with mosquito repellent, etc. Because if you don't do that, you can't really relax and enjoy the hike. So that was maybe a little bit of hardship, I would say, on day one here. Otherwise, I would say day one was quite easy, comparatively speaking, to the other days. So the distance here was in total 12 kilometers something here. And as I approached the lake here, I spotted a small peninsula, and the breeze had picked up here. So if you camp next to the lakeshore here, they sort of make it harder for the mosquitoes to hover around you so much. So I found a really nice camp spot here and cooked dinner and then enjoyed the lake view and the breeze. So I think that's about what I want to say about day one. Okay. Day two, or should I say night one perhaps. At this latitude and in middle of July as this was, there is no longer any midnight sun. But it never gets dark. It's just a couple of hours of civil twilight when the sun goes temporarily below the horizon. And it was in these twilight hours that I this day woke up to the sound of whooper swans echoing across the lake. And of course I couldn't resist getting up from my warm sleeping quilt and explore a bit. A tip for those of you who may want to do this hike or a similar hike, if you look at the map here again now, this is the campsite that I chose. But as I started to hike southward here, after just 1 kilometer I came across this sandy beach with a very good place for putting up a tent, basically a fireplace prepared for fire. This would probably have been an even better campsite than the one I chose, but I'd say no regrets. And I think the mosquito situation would have been similar whether I chose this or the other campsite, so really no regrets. But it's a good tip for you. So here is a really nice place to camp in case you're doing a similar hike as I did. As I continued on here on this day 2 southwards, the blue ribbon markings I mentioned earlier, they continued here as far as to Levik, this old settlement, early 19th century settlement. And also a bit beyond here, but not very far. As I went west here of Levik, they started to fade away. So from here on, basically, it was a mix of finding some shorter animal paths through the forest and just bushwhacking your way through the forest. But the hike here got gradually harder and harder as the terrain got more and more difficult, with more denser undergrowth, uneven ground, etc. And my strategy here was to still keep an eye on the lakeshore here, so I didn't venture too far away, sort of misled by some animal path going off here. Because when the forest gets a bit denser, it is a bit hard to keep a very straight line, right? You cannot see far enough to actually take a target, like, okay, now I'm going to go with this bearing. So it's very easy, you end up zigzagging too much just to avoid bushes and trees, etc. So I try to sort of keep an eye on the shoreline and stay as close to the lakeshore here as I moved westwards. The mosquito and horsefly situation was basically unchanged here, and actually to aggravate things a bit, on this particular day, I still remember the day, 10th of July, a heat wave hit northern Scandinavia with temperatures up to like 27, 28 degrees easily. And this really makes it even harder to hike, because you want to take off some of your clothes to cool off, right? But you can't really do that because of all the mosquitoes and horseflies. So, you just have to adapt and go with the flow. But it was getting tougher and tougher, I would say, on this day too. So in the end here, my hike only became about 10 kilometers this day because of tougher terrain and sort of feeling overheated a bit, right? And here I willingly admit that my planning for this hike was really too optimistic. I had counted on like 15 kilometers on average per day, like I normally plan when I do a normal hike where there's a mix of bushwhacking and proper trails. So at day 2 here, I realized already that I would not be able to do 15 kilometers per day or 4 days, 3 nights as I originally planned. So here's when I realized that this is going to be a 5-day, 4-night hike, which is fine. I mean, but it was just a bit angry with myself for being so overly optimistic. Okay, so at the end here then, I found a good spot here, not right on the lake shore as the previous night, but very close, so easy to walk down and get water and cool yourself, etc. That's all I have to say for day 2. Day 3 was quite similar to the previous day 2, at least in terms of navigation strategy and also the heat versus the amount of mosquitoes. And also with regards to altitude profile, just a mere 10 to 20 plus minus meters, as you can see here. The terrain, however, got yet a bit harder, with more dense undergrowth and many small trees and bushes. On the positive side, however, I passed through a few areas with lots of beautiful wildflowers. I also passed by the old settlement Bjevravre, with a mix of dilapidated and maintained buildings. Here I also chatted with a couple of guys who have come for a few days of fishing, staying in a nice wooden house by the lakeshore. Eventually I found a decent camp spot about 800 meters from the lakeshore, with a nearby small creek as my water source. Given all the different circumstances, I had by now settled with an average pace of maybe 10 kilometers per day. Day 4. The highlight of this day was my encounter with the large male elk, roughly around here. This elk was so focused on eating the yummy birch leaves that at first he didn't even notice me. Not until I purposely made a sound to see what his reaction was, and then he ran off. Also in this same area, more or less, when I noticed the bear poop that was not so old, if I put it that way, I made sure to be noisy enough to avoid to startle any bear that may be nearby. On this day 4, the combination of somewhat difficult terrain and here actually ascending about 300 meters made the hike a bit harder. At least up until this point, roughly here, almost at 700 meters. Here the density of the forest started to reduce a bit, so the hike here became gradually easier and easier. And then the rest here, as you can see, is flattish or even slightly downhill. As for the rest, essentially lots of wildflowers, the overwhelming heat and all the mosses was quite similar to the previous day. As I approached around about 9 kilometers distance here, I judged that the water in some of the smaller lakes here was really not fresh enough, which I reckon is due to a lack of rain previously, and then the just ongoing heat wave made the water line to recede quite a bit, so the water became too stagnant, some of it for healthy drinking. So I pushed on to the bigger lake here, Lastakjavre, and found a nice promontory here where I camped. Finally, taking a swim in the lake was exactly what I needed to cool down and to be able to relax the rest of the evening, munching on nuts, licorice candy and some more stuff. Day 5, the last day. To be honest, my key objective for this day was to, as soon as possible, reach Kungsleden for an easier hike the rest of the day. Thus I took a direct bearing towards the nearby snow scooter winter trail, and then I followed the snow scooter winter trail for a while until I was close enough to Kungsleden to cut across here, and then walk the rest of the way, all the way down here to the boat landing at Mallenjarka. Altitude-wise, the hike started with, as you can see here, a couple of ascents here, but only like 40-50 meter, halfway to the snow scooter trail. And then the last ascent here up to 730 meter. And then all the rest, although not shown in this graph here, is downhill from 730 meters down to Lake Sakat's about 300 meter altitude. Then to complete my hike here, I then took a boat across here from the boat landing to Kvikkjokk, drop off here, and then to the Kvikkjokk mountain station, where I also stayed one night actually. But it was full, so I had to put up my tent outside the mountain station. Now today, looking forward, I can say that I already on basically day 3 had decided that my next hike through any primary forest would be in autumn, say second half of August or the very beginning of September, not in July. That way I will still be able to enjoy the true wilderness vibe in a primary forest. And in the autumn, of course, then also the wonderful autumn colors, while reducing the amount of mossy and horsefly attacks that I would experience during the hike. Finally, if you do decide to hike through Pärlälven's Fjällurskog anywhere near this area where I have been hiking, I do hope that this video can be of some assistance in your planning. And then of course I wish you happy hiking!